do you see the role of finance in the water sphere?
Well, first, just take a step back and carry on from what Mariana said, and your opening remarks as well. I think it's very important for us all to understand that water is not just the first victim of climate change, the first manifestation of climate change. It is also part of the cause for climate change. I think COP28 registered very neatly that water is a major consequence of climate change, the droughts, the floods, the wildfires, etc. What isn't sufficiently recognized in the broad public and even amongst policymakers is that what's happening in water is also a cause of climate change. To put it very simply, the loss of moisture in the soil, the loss of moisture in the forests is itself a major source now of climate change. And there's a very real risk that the natural ecosystems, the wetlands, the forests, and the other natural ecosystems, which used to be sumps or major sources of sequestration of carbon, are actually going to tip over and become sources of emission of carbon dioxide. So to solve climate, we have to solve water. That reverse causation is absolutely critical. The good news is we can actually do it. In fact, I would say solving water is the low-hanging fruit in solving for the broader climate crisis. We know the technologies and innovations that are required. We actually have the financial resources in the global market system. What's required, as Mariana said, is changes in the way we govern water together with biodiversity and everything else that it takes to solve the climate crisis. It's changes in governance and changes in the way we finance. But it can be solved, because this is not like the open-ended questions still in CCUS, open-ended questions in some of the more adventurous efforts to create safe nuclear energy, and so on and so forth. All very exciting, but not yet proven to be safe and commercially scalable. But for water, we have proven technologies that need to be scaled up, that need to be made affordable to the ordinary farmer in India or Africa, that need to be affordable for local municipalities everywhere in the developing world, and frankly, that also need to be implemented at scale in the most advanced countries, which themselves suffer from water crises. You only have to look at the Colorado River Basin, look at large parts of California, look at even the Scandinavian countries, where there's massive leakage of water from municipal systems. I mean, more than 40% of water is just lost through municipal systems. So we can solve this. The new technologies allow us to solve that far more efficiently, at lower cost, and it allows us to scale things up. So I'll just stop there. Water is a consequence as well as a cause of climate change. It is the low-hanging fruit in our efforts to address climate change, and we can achieve it within a reasonable period of time if we organize ourselves well and if we finance this so that everyone benefits.
Thank you. This brings me actually to the narrative that perhaps you would probably want to share with us, Roshni, because President Tharman talked about technologies and innovations that need to be scaled up. And I understand that you're also engaged in scaling up. So you're probably hands on the ground. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what you are doing in this field.
Sure.
And what we can learn from you.
Great, thank you. So I think one of the things that you mentioned in your opening remarks was how to manage water. And I think just picking up what President Tharman said, I think water is managing us all at the moment. And it's really how we respond is what is extremely critical at the moment. And I think in this journey, each country, each neighborhood, each village, every society all over the world is in a different life cycle in their relationship to water. And I think this is where innovation plays a very large role. So, we've made a commitment here at WEF in partnership with Uplink for 15 million in patient capital financing over the next 5 years. And each year there will be 10 aquapreneurs, which we will find from all over the world. So in 5 years, we'll have 50 aquapreneurs. And This is not philanthropy, because these are actually business solutions that need to go to scale. And like any other startup or any other entrepreneur, they need to be profitable. They need to have a marketplace. They need to have access to the right buyers. And it's been a tremendous journey. We started last year, 10 aquapreneurs, 2 from South America, 2 from North America, 2 from Africa, 1 from Europe, 1 or 2 from India, and 1 from Southeast Asia, but that's more than 10, so I'm getting my numbers wrong. But it was a global challenge, and we had innovative solutions that came from all parts of the world. So for us as an organization, HCL, which is based in India, and India, again, I think that when people think of India, they're also thinking of us in, silos of, maybe where there's not good agricultural practice, we've got drought and we've got challenges with our farmers. There are also parts of India that get more than their fair share of water, and people are not able to manage that or even, harvest that. So I think, we've got these 10 solutions that came last year. We gave, of the 15 million, it was only about 3 million for the 10. But within 12 months, they have unlocked the aquapreneurs on their own $55 million of additional funding for their businesses. 2-3 of them have grown. I've just got the numbers because it was so mind-boggling for me to see that, 900% increase in revenue, 5 times jump in customer engagement, expanded to other countries. So I think that what it's enabling is the funding and the financing is enabling to open up a marketplace for water and water-based innovation and solution. And earlier today, we announced the second cohort of aquapreneurs. So now we've got 20, and we've got one of our young recipients here in the entry as well. So by the end of 5 years, we'll have 50 aquapreneurs from all over the world. And, they've received, for a lack of a better word, seed funding, which is here. But what a WEF or networks such as ours are able to offer them is market access, how to define your demand environment, which countries to go to, how to sell, creating an ecosystem. So I'm excited. I think we just have to continue on this journey. And there's been a lot more funding for other aspects of climate change, carbon, ecopreneurs, but I think freshwater conservation, whether it's in the natural habitats or it's in our urban habitats, they're much more linked than they used to be before, as President Tharman said. And it's important to get some financing for solutions there. Yeah.
That sounds so exciting, that such a small amount of money can then unleash so much potential from these young aquapreneurs.
Yeah.
And that brings me to you, Kirsten. You've been evaluating the cost or value of wetlands, and you have come with a number, quite a large number, probably half the world's global GDP. How do you see that in relation to your perception of keeping humans central in the evaluation of water and water ecosystems? Does that in any way clash with a business perspective, or does it align well with it?
No, thank you. I mean, so the number is 58 trillion. I have to say the number. There's a lot behind that number, right? And I think what's interesting about it is precisely because it shows that conserving nature, whether it's freshwater or forests or oceans, has an economic value and matches very well with the business interests. What's behind the 58 trillion is, on the one hand, there is a large direct economic value. You know, water is an input, drinking water is really important to food production, energy production. and so forth. But there's also a huge indirect economic value because a lot of wetlands, for example, and other freshwater ecosystems play a key role in purifying water, storm production, floodwater control. And so there is a huge economics behind the conservation of wetlands and river basins. The problem is that we've often don't really realize what that economic value is and how that actually impacts us as people. And so before I started, so I've been with WWF for about 20 years, but before I did that, I was actually doing work on the economic values of wetlands. I am an economist by background, and I did that in the field in Kenya and Malawi. And just from a local community perspective, the immense amount of dependency of people on wetlands and on river basins, it's enormous. I mean, their entire livelihoods depend on water. Now, if you look at corporates, it's pretty much the same thing, except that we take it for granted. These local communities have no choice, right? They have no choice but to take water and their food and their building materials for their houses from the local ecosystem. But I think a lot of us living in other parts of the world, we have a choice, but I think we've taken for granted. I mean, water pricing is a big topic. As you know, the price we pay for water is so incredibly low in many parts of the world. But I think it's about time that we realize as corporates that, taking water stewardship seriously, because it's a very important part of our production system, right? Again, so much of water is necessary for food production, for energy production, and so forth. The reality is that, however, we're losing ecosystems at lightning speed, right? So every other year, WWF brings out what we call the Living Planet Report. Now, in the last 70 years, we've lost about almost 70% of species living in the wild, just generally, in every single ecosystem. For freshwater, it's 83%. So just since 1970, we have lost 83% of species living in freshwater ecosystems. Species are indicators of the health of ecosystems, not much more than that. So it tells you how much we're losing, and not just the quantity, but also the quality of our freshwater ecosystems. As a conservationist, of course, that's painful. I care deeply about that. But as an economist, there's a whole other world out there that I think we need to look at, because this poses real risks to corporates and to us in our livelihoods. And so I think the 58 trillion is all about that. It's realizing that we all need to look seriously at the freshwater issue, the water scarcity. I fully agree with what you were just saying. I think the whole issue around climate change is going to be felt primarily through freshwater, whether too much of it or too little of it, and depending on where you live. And so having this figure should be a wake-up call, I think, for all of us to realize that we need to include the assessment of freshwater availability in our risk assessments as corporates, as part of water stewardship, and be prepared of what will come over the next years as climate change is going to be impacting us wherever we sit.
Thank you so much. So we have to value our ecosystems and our water systems, and actually we get huge returns back if we invest in it. Coming to you, Ulrich, you are a pioneer in the field of water management in your own way, and you've been developing all kinds of technologies in your company. What is your vision about how we should develop water technologies and unlock water economies?
Well, first of all, we need to acknowledge that we are out of balance. As it says, that we need to do something about it. You talked about climate, water interdependencies. But I just think here in the scene of WEF, we also need to recognize that inequality or inequity in water means inequity in life. So it just goes beyond, water is beyond water. 2 billion people don't have access to safe, clean water. And not having access to that means not having access to education, not having access to health, same health, staying in poverty and not getting out of poverty. So water is has the knock-on effect and a multiplier effect that if we create conditions for water, we create conditions for many of these SDGs that we actually fight to actually win. So therefore, that's actually the true value of water. The value of water is not just what water can do of solve the water, but it's actually about the knock-on effect it has on all the other SDGs. Now, what are some of the deficits we then need to to do something about. First of all, we need to price value differently than we do today. You said it, too low price, but also not fully understanding the value of it. Secondly, too many companies, too many governments don't really fundamentally understand the issue of water. What's the problem? How can it actually be addressed? I'm happy to see that more reports is coming out, now a preliminary report and a final report later. But we need to create better understanding of the issue. And then thirdly, as was also said before, we need global coalitions, global standards for how we manage water, global measurements, but also global ambitions. Think about what net zero has done to our CO2 journey, because everyone has jumped onto that wagon. When we find the same measurement terminology and agree upon it, everyone, and create a coalition around that, we will start rally each other to actually get there. But we're quite ambitious. We don't wait for that. Everyone can get started. Every company can get started. I just want to share a few things that I believe every company could do. First of all, start looking at your own water print, your own water footprint. What's the water impact of your operations? How do you actually draw upon water? How do you recycle water? Then secondly, go beyond that, look at the water handprint. How do you actually act in the ecosystem? What impact do you have through water, your water withdrawals, through the whole ecosystem? Are you placed in any sort of water stressed areas, and actually take that into consideration? Then understand your baseline, build some ambitions around it, and don't accept to have a sustainability strategy that doesn't include water. I think everyone can do something about it and actually get started on that journey.
That sounds so encouraging, so positive, and it's so much in line with the kind of work that we're trying to do over here. Roshni talked about giving seed grants to young aquapreneurs to enable them to develop and scale up ideas. President Tharman, why is it not happening that more people are giving such seed grants? How do we unlock this? Is it possible?
I think why it's not happening is because, first, as Paul just mentioned, most people don't understand that what's happening in water is not just about local extremities, large flood, prolonged drought, and so on, but that there's a shift in global conditions, what you call a tilt in the global cycle. It's very hard for most people to understand that. So governments treat this as just a bad happening, a chance happening, and just hope it doesn't happen again. Yeah. Maybe widen the drains so that you don't get such bad floods. So there isn't very much understanding to begin with of what it takes beyond the micro-local solutions. I think this understanding can be spread, and that's one of our principal aims. And very importantly, it's now about scaling up not just one or two big innovations, but scaling up categories of innovations and allowing for some competition and flourishing of different experiments and different specific technologies. So for instance, if you talk about the massive amounts of water that's simply wasted, so industrial wastewater, the vast majority of it is simply dispensed with, right? And often you're dispensing polluted water or extremely hot water into the waterways. If that's a challenge, and we know that solutions exist, what's required on the part of the public sector is to define that challenge, explain how we are going to incentivize and regulate the solutions, and call for bids. And I know for sure that there's a whole range of technologies now that are competing at the frontier of that market, which have increased the efficiency of reuse to now well beyond 90% through improved membrane technologies, new materials, new methods of operating membrane technologies as well. Fascinating. And we've got to, essentially, when it comes to these new areas, our role has to be to drive down the costs of these new solutions by moving faster than the market would on its own move. Moving faster than the market would on its own move. That's what happened in solar. That's what's going to happen here as well. So the task of the public sector is to co-invest, mitigate risk, and also to set standards and regulations so that we can basically shift down the cost abatement curve. In other words, make what looks like hard to abate sectors become easier to abate by achieving scale and providing some public incentive for private investment. And that's what we need to do. We need to take a system-wide approach. It doesn't mean everything becoming centralized, going only for a global solution and then imposing that same global solution everywhere. It means recognizing that there's a global problem, recognize the 6 to 8 key areas where we can do something about it, and then call for competition, call for bidders. And the public sector will have to be there to regulate, set standards, and very often mitigate risks, because these are very often technologies which are not yet cost effective, but they will be with investment at scale.
Roshni, everybody here is talking about increasing the price of water so that people recognize it. In a country like India, where so many people are really poor and can't afford it, how do you see that operationalized? Do you think it's possible?
I think India lives in many centuries. So I think where there are big cities where you have a robust middle class, which is getting more and more affluent, they have a very different relationship with water. And I think to some of the points that you raised, taking it more for granted. And, and if you were to price it, I think the first question, higher price it, why are you charging me so much? And, so I think there's a very different relationship that they have. Whereas there are parts of India where water is not so readily available. And, I'm still not sure that they value it. They just know that they need it to survive. So I think it's very, because they're trying to meet ends meet every day, and they've probably seen it deteriorate over time. So, they have a very different relationship with what's happening in the natural ecosystem, their agricultural ecosystem, what's happening in wetlands, their groundwater. And then you've got parts of India where there's so much water, and that has different repercussions, because even then they are not able to use it for economic benefit and growth. So I don't think that there is a clear answer.
So I guess what you're saying is maybe you have to price it based on the kind of communities also who can benefit from it. So if people can't afford it, maybe it has to be subsidized. Maybe you have different, yes, Tharman?
I was just going to chip in that.
Yeah, sure.
A large part of the problem is actually you're getting perversely negative pricing, or put another way, you're getting subsidies for the wrong things. So for instance, one of the reasons why so much groundwater is being extracted in agriculture in many countries is because energy is subsidized and the diesel is subsidized. So people, in fact, it's often free in some farms. They're basically incentivized to just pump more and more groundwater. And now it's unsustainable. Now, if you could price the energy, it gives you a source of revenue that then enables you to subsidize the right type of farming. So we've got to do both removing the bad subsidies and introducing the good subsidies. And in order to afford it, you do need some pricing that will appear fair to the smallholder farmer.
Right, and it's the challenge there, of course, that many of these farmers who own the land also own the water. So there's no actual purchase or sale happening over there. So that's something also we have to think about in the future. But I was really talking about the people who buy water for drinking and sanitation, and that becomes very expensive for the poor. I can give the example of my mother. She pays a standard amount, which is very limited, but the people on the street pay much more if they have to go to the toilet. So it's a very ironic system that a middle-class person pays less in some ways than the poor people when they want to access water. But to come to your question, I mean, Ulrich raised the point that actually water is a multiplier because it multiplies in terms of access to education, access to health, and then access to job, and maybe access to development. And you were talking about the ecosystems. So do you think you underestimated in your value of ecosystems his narrative about the impact of water on humans?
No, I think it was a great comment. I don't know in that sense the exact calculations. My guess is that it probably is an underestimation, which is kind of cool as well, because this is a very low, I mean, 58 trillion sounds like a lot, but if you think that it could actually be even more, because I think you're right. I think there is, I mean, water is life, right? So in that sense, I think the multiplier effect is endless when you think about it. So it's not like there's a lot we can say about other ecosystems that are hugely important for life, but I think fresh water is the basis for all life on Earth. So valuing that and seeing that as the basis of our socio-economic well-being, wherever you live, I think is hugely important. My guess is, I mean, having worked on this for such a long time, is there is an increasing realization, and it's not because we're throwing around these numbers, but simply because we're dealing with the reality of this more and more each and every day in all the places where we live. I mean, I come from the Netherlands, and we have fought for thousands of years. Mainly it's been about just getting rid of fresh water all the time because we're battling fresh water for flooding. Now, all of a sudden, for the past, let's say, 5-6 years, well, you live in the Netherlands too, you know, all of a sudden we're faced with droughts. And so now we have to come up with a system in the Netherlands where, on the one hand, we're faced with flooding, we want to get rid of it, and other times you want to keep the fresh water. And so what that means is a completely different look at the way the Netherlands is organized, because fresh water is everywhere, right? So yes, I think the 58 trillion is probably a very conservative value. I don't think the value in itself is going to change things, but I think it's going to be a reality check for many of us, wherever we live.
So you come from the Netherlands, and the Netherlands has always claimed that it is one of the leaders in the world in terms of water governance. And now we find that the Netherlands is not yet prepared to deal with half the impacts of climate change. And so it's a bit surprising for such a developed country not to have that. In your presentation, Ulrich, you were talking about the fact that there is a lot of ignorance, and the question now that comes to mind is, why is it that politicians don't see water as important?
It's a difficult and it's a complex issue to address. We talked about that. But I want to give an example of my own home country, Denmark. Worked on water like Holland. But there, over 100 of years, water regulation and continuous improvement from the policy has been a demand to the society. And therefore, in that ongoing collaboration between private and government and utilities, the bar has just been raised. And today, we are operating Denmark with 4 to 5% non-revenue water. We still think we can do it better, but it's come by that continuous sort of sharpening the saw on what can be done. And when I say put a value on water, it's not like I'm looking for a global price setting on water, but it's a business. Water is a business. It's many other things, but it's also a business. And if there is a fair price of water, it will incentivize investment in water. It will incentivize actually innovating in water, innovating in new solutions, putting new solutions in place, encouraging startups to actually come into this, because there is actually not only providing great for the environment, nature, health, clean water, but there's actually good return on investment of actually doing the water business. That's why I'm actually looking to raising the bar on understanding the value on water and putting a value to it. It also means that there's a value to every water you take in, or if you don't clean your water, it has some value to you if you just leave it out because you need to take something else in. So I think putting a higher value on water will see a higher motivation for being much more thoughtful about your water, managing your water demand, but also increasing the deployment of some of those great water reuse technologies that, as you said, already exist. They just need to be deployed more. And putting more value to water will actually help that.
Thank you. When you are having a good discussion, time runs. You've 30 seconds each to give one good message to the Global Commission on the Economics of Water that's finalizing its report. So perhaps, Tharman?
We can solve this. We can solve this with shifts in governance, some shifts in legal arrangements. So for instance, Joita, you mentioned the issue of people who own the land and therefore own the water under the land. That shouldn't necessarily be the case. And by the way, in Singapore, there's no private owner of the water under the land. The state owns all the water under the land. The state owns the rainfall, and it's used for the public good. So it just requires shifts in governance that critically involve looking at the public good, pricing water to recognize its manifold values for the entire ecosystem on which we depend, and being fair to people so that you subsidize where subsidies are really required.
Roshni?
So I'm going to go back to what I said in the beginning. I think we're today sitting in a world where whichever part of the world is, water is managing you, not the other way around. And there's some great innovations and solutions out there waiting to be scaled. They need more funding, they need more patient capital, and they need more marketplaces where the global solution can also be localized. And so, yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
I would just say that I think the world is waking up, and for that part of the world that's not waking up, I think they will be forced to wake up soon. So the sooner, but what we need, I was going to say exactly the same, what we need is scale and speed. I mean, we've been talking about this for such a long time, and the urgency is getting higher and higher. And I think, again, lots of people are coming on board. Let's move faster and at a bigger scale than we have been doing over the past years.
Ulrich?
Value it, start seeing that the cost of no action is just too costly. And I think maybe just start here to the audience here, you online, all the business leaders that are here at WEF, have you recognized your dependency on water? I think we can all do something about it. A sustainability strategy for any company that doesn't contain water, simply not good enough. So get started. Business leaders, set some ambitions, commit to it, change the mindset. And then we need a global coalition to build global standards and measurement and ambitions for where we want to take water in the same way as we've done at the climate side.
Thank you. So let me try to summarize what has been said so far. We've been told by our panelists that water has an immense value because of the ecosystems it supports, and the ecosystems provide us services. So that's why it's very important to protect the water. We've been told by our panelists that water is a multiplier of development, and that access to water is access to education, health, etc. Mariana also added that if you have access to water and sanitation services, you may not get raped on the way to get your water services. So water is really valuable. We've been told that we need to find finance, but there is money everywhere. The question is, how do we scale up this? Tharman has told us that it is a low-hanging fruit. Water is really easy to solve because we have the technologies, we have the knowledge, we have the opportunities. We just have to get all the actors together and change the dynamics so that the governance system changes. And we were told by Roshni that if you provide small grants, starter grants to new entrepreneurs, new agripreneurs like you, we can actually mobilize change, and that can be scaled up. The question is, why is it not happening? And that is a challenge for the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, and that's what we will work on. And we'll take your advice to try to mobilize global coalitions on this issue, and we look forward to the support of the World Economic Forum in actually pushing this further. And hopefully some help in ground truthing both the ecosystem storyline, but also what can be possible in developing countries. With that, I think we will bring this session to an end. Thank you for coming, and I hope you and the people online, you didn't have an opportunity to ask any questions, but should you have questions, please write to us at the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. Thank you.
Thank you.